Here's something you might not know. Around the world, governments have started trying to measure your happiness. Not your income, not the economy, your actual felt day to day happiness. There are countries with official well being budgets, national happiness surveys. One even had at one point something like a ministry of happiness. And on the surface, that sounds wonderful. Finally, a government that cares how you feel, but sits with it for a second and it gets strange. A government measuring your happiness, setting targets for it. I've spent my career inside the machinery of policy, and that idea makes me more uneasy than comforted. Not because caring about people is bad, but because I think the whole project is aimed at the wrong target. So let's ask the real question, not can policy make us happier? The deeper one underneath it, what happens to a whole society depending on what it decides happiness even is? For most of modern history, we've judged a country by one number above all others: GDP, how much wealth it produces. And GDP is useful, but here's its blind spot. A country can get richer every single year, while its people get lonelier, sicker, more anxious. The number goes up, the lives don't get better. Because GDP was never measuring people, it was measuring production. And here's the part almost no one knows. Man who built the modern concept of GDP, economist Simon Kuznets, stood in front of the US Congress in 1934 and warned them not to use it this way. His exact words: the welfare of a nation can scarcely be inferred from a measurement of national income. The inventor told us, we just didn't listen. So, some countries tried something else. The tiny kingdom of Bhutan built an entire philosophy of government around what is called gross national happiness. Not one number, but 33 indicators across health, education, culture, and ecology. Not a gimmick, a serious attempt to measure whether people are actually okay. And it spread. In 2019, New Zealand made global headlines with the world's first well being budget, around $26 billion, allocated not by growth, but by whether it's improved people's lives. Scotland, Wales, and others built their own frameworks. For a moment, it looked like the world was turning a corner. And then it started to unravel. In 2004, New Zealand quietly killed its well being budget. The new finance minister dismissed it as, in her word, marketing. And in 2025, when the UN revised how nations measure their economies, it kept GDP as a headline number. So the honest truth is this: the movement to measure happiness is real, but it's fragile. In a lot of places, it's already retreating. Now, why does this matter so much? Because of one thing most people outside of government never see. A metric is not a description. A metric is a steering wheel. When you're outside the system, you think measurements just describe reality. Here's the number, neutral, a thermometer. But inside, it's the opposite. Whatever you decide to measure becomes a thing everyone is judged on. And the moment people are judged on a number, they chase it. Budgets bend toward it, careers rise and fall on it, measure test scores, and schools become test prep factories, measure arrests, and policing warps toward arresting. The metric stops describing the world and starts bending it. So when a government says, we'll measure happiness, that is not soft. It is one of the most powerful decisions a state can make because that number will quietly redirect a whole society. Which means everything depends on one question: what exactly are we counting when we count happiness? Because we're about to point a whole society at it. And this is where it gets fascinating because the science of happiness has been fighting about this for 50 years. It starts in 1974. An economist named Richard Easterlin, notices something strange. As countries get richer over time, their people don't actually report being happier. Growth went up, happiness stayed flat. They called it the Easterlin paradox. Then in 2010, two giants, Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton, find that happiness does rise with income, but only up to a point. Around $75,000 a year, it plateaus. After that, more money barely moves the needle. But in 2021, a researcher named Matthew Killingsworth, using an app that pings people in real time, finds the opposite. Happiness keeps rising with income, no plateau. Two noble caliber findings, flatly contradicting each other. So in 2023, instead of feuding, they did something rare in science. Heyman and Killingsworth teamed up, an adversary collaboration, to figure out who was actually right. And what they found is the whole reason for this lesson. Here it is. Money keeps lifting happiness for most people. Killingsworth was right about them. But for the least happy, the people carrying something deeper, loneliness, grief, no community, real suffering, more money does almost nothing. You cannot buy your way out of that kind of pain. That is the crack in the entire project of measuring happiness. Because the individual happiness score is blindest to the people who need it the most. So picture what happens when you point a government at that number. You optimize for individual satisfaction. You build a society that's very good at serving individuals, convenient, comfortable, personalized, frictionless. And you can do all of that while the bonds between people quietly rot. You end up with a nation of well served, comfortable, deeply isolated individuals, each one reasonably content, and each one alone. Everyone reports a solid 7 out of 10, and something underneath it dies. Because the one thing an individual happiness score can never see is us, the relationships, the web, whether we still belong to each other. You can raise the number and lose the us. So maybe the problem isn't the answer. Maybe the problem is the question. Because there's an older question one African thought has been asking for a very long time. It doesn't ask, is the individual happy? It asks, is the community well? Can people meet their obligations to each other? Is anyone being abandoned? That's Ubuntu. And at the scale of a society, well being isn't a private score you carry inside you, it's relational. I am well when we are all well. Now, watch how the choices change. Imagine two governments with the exact same budget. The first aims at individual happiness, it spends on convenience, on personal comfort, on making each separate life smoother. Everyone gets a little bit more comfortable alone. The second aims at collective flourishing. Same money, but it spends on things that bind people, shared spaces, support for families and elders, the connectivity tissue of a community. Same budget, two completely different societies. One produces comfortable, lonely individuals. The other produces a people connected, harder to isolate, far more resilient when things get hard. And remember what the 2023 research told us. For the people struggling most, it's exactly that belonging that money alone can't buy. So let's finally answer the question in today's topic focus and lesson. Can policy make us happier? No. And I mean that plainly. Policy cannot make you happy. Happiness lives in your relationships, your meaning, the people you love. A government that promises to deliver happiness into you is overreaching. In honesty, a state that thinks it can engineer inner feelings is one you should be a little afraid of. But that was always the wrong job. Here's the right one. Policy can't make you happy, but it can build a world where flourishing is possible. Whether you're not isolated, where you're no longer abandoned, or where no one is abandoned, and where the bonds that actually make people well are protected instead of quietly eroded in the name of convenience. Stop asking policy to hand happiness to individuals. Ask it to protect the conditions in which a community can flourish together. Government can't hand you the fruit, but it can tend the soil or poison it. So go back to that image from the start. A government measuring your happiness, setting a target for how you feel. I told you it made me uneasy, right? Now you know why. We're asking the state to hand us something it can't give and shouldn't try to, one isolated individual at a time. But the question was never really whether policy can make you happy. It's whether it lets us flourish. A government can't give you a good life, but it can decide whether you have to live it alone. That, not the number, not the happiness number, is a thing worth measuring. It's Tamu Academy, sweet learning for a better world.